Welcome to Vancouver, and welcome to our West Executive Board. There's so many people that we haven't seen in so long that I'm so happy to see. I think I was saying yesterday, it's like getting around our family we haven't seen for a long time. So thank you everyone for attending. And it's such a well-attended executive board. So hopefully everyone will have fun here in Vancouver, learn lots today, and exchange ideas and everything that we have. I'm very pleased to have a member, or Michelle, from, if you don't mind introducing yourself, guest of an independent union in Calgary.
Sure. So thanks everyone. I'm very appreciative of the invitation to attend today. My name is Michelle Lagula. I'm the president of the Mount Royal Staff Association. And with me today is Lane Fowler, our labor relations officer. Lane's a pretty new hire. We raised our dues. I was explaining to someone recently, about 2 years ago, we finally managed to convince our membership to raise dues to support a labor relations officer, because we were just not getting a lot of attention. Like, we were basically getting rolled over at work. So Lane has provided amazing support. We've made some incredible strides. We just recently ratified a collective agreement that was in the works. We were 2.5 years negotiating that, so we finally have ratified that. We're 2 years into a 4-year agreement, but will be added again in a year. Mount Royal University has about 13,000 students. We have about 600 plus regular employees, and then we're getting close to about 200 casual staff. Most of those are students, so we're sort of having some questions about how to manage those casual hourly students. But we are one of 3 universities in Alberta that are standalone unions. We do not belong to the AUP, which is the Alberta Provincial Employee Union. So we are not swallowed up by a big union yet. We fight independently for ourselves. We work collaboratively with the other 2 institutions, the University of Alberta and McEwen University. So we do support each other, but looking, of course, to gather strength. And so the invitation to attend today and learn from all of you is much appreciated. And we'll take back whatever we learned today to our other 2 sister universities. So thank you again.
Thank you very much. So we're quickly going to do some introductions, and I've already gone to the tables. I was wondering if I could start with CMA, if you can introduce CMA.
Hi, Andrew Brown from CMA, Construction Maintenance and Allied Workers of Canada. We're in BC, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and we're working our way into Nova Scotia now. We mostly do carpenters, scaffolders, maintenance agreements. We've got the shipyard, Vancouver Shipyard, and we've also got the Hope School Board.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. John Costello.
Good morning, John Wapp. I'm the president of the Canadian Union of Skilled Workers. Gary and I are here representing CUSW. We were established in 1999. We're primarily a skilled trades union with collective agreements in Ontario, British Columbia, different provinces with a different kind of collective agreements. We came out of the energy sector in Ontario. We were part of an international union prior to 1999, and our members decided to move away and establish a Canadian organization, a Canadian union. We operate a hiring hall. We have a number of skilled trades that work through different collective agreements with different employers. Our bigger employers are in the energy sector in Ontario, OPG, Hydro One, Bruce Power, that sort of approach, and then we're growing across the province as those public utilities shift to engaging more and more contractors. We're building opportunities outside of the energy sector in mining and that sort of thing. So, thanks.
Awesome.
I should say we're a member of the CCU in 2018. At our convention, the members voted to affiliate, and it's been great and very exciting partnership since then. And it helps us grow as an organization. Kelly and Gary and a number of others in the CCU have helped us grow across Canada. So
Thanks, John. Yeah, great. Thank you. Thank you. ACs.
Hi, I'm Chris McCann. I'm president of ACs. We represent 3,100 members, affiliated members of the CCU at the Universities of Winnipeg and Manitoba. We have been proud members of the CCU since 2018 as well. We just joined right before CUSW, and we've really found this body to be very rewarding at our local level to participate at a national level, especially one with such a rich history. Again, we support educational services. We do everything from helping students all the way through their journey from admission to graduation, and in research and in other ancillary services of like current security, providing technical and computer support. And if anybody goes to university at the University of Winnipeg or Manitoba, they succeed based on the success of AC's employees.
Good.
Nice.
Well put. Well put. Yusuf.
Sunny. I'm the president of the York University Staff Association. So we represent about 1,600 non-academic, technical, clerical staff at York University, and about, it varies, but around 500 part-time staff as well. So how long have we been part of the CCU? Scarlett, how long have we been part of the CCU? Like a million years?
76, I think.
Yeah.
Since 1976. So we're one of the longer
Yes.
members of the CCU. Trying to think, anything else I want to say? I mean, I think we face a lot of the same struggles as other workers across Canada, but especially in the educational sector. We also have difficulties with the government in Ontario. They did a legislation to cap our wages at 1% pay increase, so we just had to deal with that in the last round of bargaining. Although we found some creative ways to sort of get a little bit more added to our benefits. Maybe we'll talk about that tomorrow in our report. But it's good to see you all. It's good to be back.
Thanks, Sonny. Thanks. Nasupi?
Hi folks, my name is Shelby. I am with NASUPI, which is the Nova Scotia Union of Public and Private Employees. So NASUPI only represents about 1,800 members across Nova Scotia and in PEI, but we are also a really mighty and diverse crowd. So we've got the three of us here and this large table over there. We've got all different kinds of professions, ranging from the inside workers of the Halifax Regional Municipality to the custodial and maintenance workers of the school board for the Halifax Regional Municipality. We've got library workers in Halifax and now a new local down in the Annapolis Valley of Nova Scotia. And then we also have some smaller locals down in Digby. We've got life coaches in Halifax. We've got all different, and Canadian Blood Services workers in the province of PEI as well. So we are small, but we are very mighty when we come together, and we are very, very happy to all of us be here as a big crowd. So thank you all for having us.
Woo. PwC.
So, hi everybody, my name is Jeff Daw. We're PwC. We cover forestry, we cover pulp and paper, we have trades, we have power engineers, we have plastic manufacturers, all out in BC here, hospital workers, and we also have aviation. So this is what we take care of, PPWC.
Yeah, and I think we've been affiliated almost since the start.
Yeah, I believe
the
so.
Different locals. Yeah. Good. Thanks, Jeff. So I'm Kelly Johnson. I'm president of the Confederation of Canadian Unions, and I have been since 2017. We hold biannual elections, and the next election comes up in 2023. And I'm also the president of the National Public and Private Workers of Canada. I just took over from Mr. Gary Figge on July 1st. and before that, I've been active my entire life. So yeah, that's my story. I saved it for last for a reason. Mark Miller, our vice president.
Also a member of CMA and elected representative for CMA and the Kootenays, and I sit on the CMA provincial executive board as well. Kelly has asked me to also give a little spiel on CCU. So for those of you who aren't aware, especially the two visitors at our table, which is awesome. Nice to have you guys here. CCU's been around since 1969. We're the longest standing Confederation of Unions in the country. And we're proud to say that we represent, or that we affiliate, allowed to affiliate only independent, fully Canadian unions with no influence from American partners. Interestingly, when CMA joined an international organization of unions that was focused on construction and building unions, when we met with the president and the outreach person, they informed us that Canada was the only country in the world that allowed unions from other countries to come and represent their employees within their country. So I think where Canada is kind of, in my opinion, should be focusing more on unions like us that represent Canadians, by Canadians and for Canadians. So
Yeah, well said.
about 20,000 people, and that's, yeah. Am I good? Very comfortable talking about CMA. Kelly's working on me.
Awesome, thanks, Mark. Thank you very much. But we met Katrina in 2018 at our convention, and Katrina was with Press Progress at the time. She gave a great speech, and we always reflected on that. And I think it's still on the website, is it not, Sean? There we go.
Yeah.
So Katrina is from Canadians for Tax Fairness.
That's right, yeah.
And it goes with our Numo campaign that we have ongoing right now. So we thought this would be an excellent lead-in. So for today, Katrina Miller from Canadians for Tax Fairness. Take it away.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me. It's true. I'm going to talk to you about taxes for like 3 hours. I promise. I'm going to make it interesting. I'm going to do my best, at least. I'm just trying to see. Oh, there we go. Good. I think that's working. Let's just make sure there we go. Taxes, it's pretty dry material, and I'm not going to lie to you. There's going to be some dry material. Like I've got bar graphs, and I got charts, and I got that sort of stuff in here as well. But what I like about taxes is it's really the story, to me, of us collectively pooling resources to build the kind of society we want. That's really what taxes are, right? And so for a bunch of people who spend a lot of their time, building society both physically and socially and economically, I think that taxes are a really important part of the conversation, an important part of the work that you do as unions and as workers. It's not going to just be me talking, in fact, during this workshop. We're going to break this workshop into 3 different sections with breaks in between, depending on how long we go in these sections. The breaks will either be mini breaks, like get up, stretch a little bit, or longer breaks, like, go out and get a breath of fresh air and come back in 5 minutes. We'll see how it goes. The first part, we're going to just talk about the story of taxes. What have we been told about taxes over the last few decades? And where do we sit now in this conversation about taxes? Because things have changed a lot. Like the narrative and story of taxes has gone on some pretty interesting paths in the last 40 years. After that break, we're going to talk about tax campaigns in Canada. Where is the tax conversation in Canada? What has the government done and not done? What are the big types of tax measures people are talking about? We're going to break that down a little bit and talk about that. And then the last section is really going to be the roll up the shirt sleeves, work at your tables, and talk about what the CCU can do around taxes, or your union, or your particular union. So we can kind of treat that based on how people want to take it. They want to talk about the CCU as a whole, or we want to talk about the union. And we'll do some tax campaign brainstorming as our last section. Sound good?
Sounds good. Yeah.
Awesome. So we're going to start off with an interactive part, which is I wanted you to just spend a couple of minutes at your table going around and telling each other what was the last memorable thing you heard about taxes, not including anything I just said. Last memorable thing you heard about taxes. It could have been something around the dinner table during Thanksgiving, if you celebrate Thanksgiving. Could have been something in the municipal elections that are going on in various areas in Canada. Could have been something you read in the news. What was the last memorable thing you remember hearing about taxes? And just share that with each other at your table for like a couple minutes. What was the last memorable thing they heard on taxes? We're just popcorning it up. Start at the table in the back.
We talked about the price of the difference of fluctuation of fuel costs in BC alone.
Oh, yeah. Lots of conversation about the fuel taxes these days, huh?
From the cookies that we're paying still $2.05 a liter.
Yeah.
Vancouver dropped down like 35 cents a liter last week. We won't see that.
Nope. Yeah, absolutely. That's been a huge topic of conversation, right? Taxes and inflation. Next table.
This isn't me saying it, but I was in a conversation where someone was saying, why are people getting a $500 GST rebate and I don't? My kids are just going to have to pay for it in the debt.
Right. So why does somebody get something and I don't get it, right? How about this
We
table?
were talking about taxing the rich.
Taxing the rich.
And what does it mean?
Right. It's a good slogan. What's behind it, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Absolutely. How about this table?
There was some discussion around rural taxation and what do you get for it? You're paying big money for these rural properties, but you don't have any of the services that they have in the cities, the parks, recreation, or anything like that.
Are you getting what you're due when you pay your taxes? Particular communities, remote communities, rural communities, absolutely. Let's do it back here.
We had a hard time thinking about it. We're all still waiting.
Yeah, it's okay. Well, and it may be, I don't remember anything I've heard on taxes because they're not that interesting to me.
Right.
That's quite valid,
So
frankly,
we
right?
talked a little bit about apathy towards elections and taxes, and about, was it like the carbon tax, and we talked a little bit about a soda tax and about the tax rebate in the form of double GST check, but that's,
So you found some things to talk about. You sort of dragged it out of the memory banks of the word there. How about this table in the back?
We were unimpressed with the fact that child tax benefit and how some people are eligible for it and others aren't, just simply because of where they fall in their tax brackets.
Yeah. So, the idea that we have these sort of income tests that don't necessarily make sense, and some of the tax credits that are supposed to help people out, particularly families and working people and seniors. How about this table here?
Well, we decided we don't want to pay anymore.
I think you were the first comment I heard was somebody said, well, we're paying too much. There we go, bingo.
I think a lot of what we talked about is pretty much what you could say is misappropriation of spending through the Liberal government on a federal basis. And how that debt is just racking up and up and up, and it's the tax money that's going to be the only form of income to reduce it.
Right. So a concern about the debt, and tax revenue potentially to reduce it, or what do we use the tax revenue for? Right? It sounds like it's part of the question there, right? Yeah. Yes. All right. We're going to get into all of that. Well, not everything, but we're going to get into most of this, in fact. So I'm sure people are familiar with this saying. Right? This is it feels like it's as old as time. And for a lot of part of our society, this is kind of what we've considered taxes to be. Inevitable. Kind of like death. Nothing you can look forward to, but nothing you can avoid either. Right? However, within this, for a good portion of what we would consider sort of modern society, we have thought of taxes as, we have thought of taxes as the way that we pay for society, particularly the kinds of society we want to live in. It's how we get a sewage system. It's how we get roads. It's how we get electricity. That's taxes, right? And you get more into modern society, it's how you get healthcare, it's how you get education, it's how you get libraries, it's how you get this is what taxes is. It's how we get the markings and the infrastructure, social and physical, for the civilized society that we want to live in. We may still not like them, but we understand what they're attached to. Now, about 30 or 40 years ago, the neoconservative movement sort of started a very long-term and intentional anti-tax agenda, where they decided it was time to change our relationship and our conversation about taxes. And they started by talking about taxes as if we were just dealing with taxes as individuals. Taxes are what I pay my government to give me a service. So what's interesting about this is different, right? This is no longer about civilized society. This is about what I get from my taxes, right? As opposed to what we as a society build with our taxes. That's the first change that starts to happen, is that shift. I don't know, is anyone here familiar with P.J. O'Rourke? He's a famous satirist and libertarian. The guy is actually hysterical. If you ever want to read some really great libertarian satire, if you can stand libertarian satire, which I can. He's very, very funny, and you know, he's sort of famously quoted for saying this. That anti-tax agenda starts to move and shift quite quickly to it being no taxes are good taxes, to the point where our own prime minister actually goes on record and says that he doesn't believe that there are any taxes that are good taxes. The leader of the government that actually depends on taxes to run itself is famously quoted for saying this. Now, he gets lambasted, and a bunch of journalists go after him, and so on and so forth. But the fact that he says this in 2009 shows how far that anti-tax agenda moves the country, right? Moves Canada. That we have a prime minister who's saying, basically, all taxes are bad taxes, and we should do everything in our power to reduce them as much as possible. And that's actually kind of what happens. And then you've got these sorts of organizations. This is actually, sort of our counterpart organization. Counterpart is like, I don't know, it's like our deathly opponent. This is the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, who start to celebrate being free of taxes, right? And so they have these tax freedom days that they have, where they say, this is the moment where none of the income you make goes towards taxes anymore. You've basically been an indentured servant up to now, and now here's the moment when you're finally free of taxes. So you can see what's happening here is this shift to taxes being fine, something that none of us really like, but they're the price of a civilized society. They're what we pay in order to have the kind of place we want to live in together. To all taxes are bad, and basically when you pay them, you're an indentured servant, and then when you don't pay them, you're finally free, right? That's the shift that's happened over the last 30 or 40 years. And how has that impacted Canada? Here's where the graphs start. There's going to be a few of them. I'll try to go through them quickly and explain. There's a graph for America.
Like numbers.
Yay, all right. So this is a graph of tax to GDP ratio, comparing Canada to the OECD from 2000 to 2018. The OECD average is the one in black. Canada is the one in blue. To put this in perspective, for the 20 years previous to this, Canada would have been on top, and the OECD average would have been below. Now, the OECD average includes a lot of very low tax countries that do not have the kind of social support that we have, a lot of infrastructure we have. Yes?
The acronym for OECD stands for?
The Economic Cooperation
Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development.
Yeah, I don't think I have to say that in like years, but you're right. I totally forgot about that. Thank you very much. You might have to point out a few more of those that have just become short term for me. So before this, Canada would have been above that average, and now it's fallen below that average. And that cost to us is about $50 billion a year that we've lost in tax revenue over that period of time. That's a significant chunk of change. Just think about our healthcare system. under COVID. Think about our long-term care system under COVID, right? Think about the things that cracked and broke during the time we needed them most. And then think about that missing $50 billion. So where did it go, is the question. Well, here's another interesting aspect of what's happened to taxes over this period of time. This is 1918 to 2013. The yellow line, or the orangey yellow line, that's personal income taxes. The blue line is corporate income taxes. So what has happened is the tax burden has shifted onto the individual and shifted away from corporations over this very long period of time. And we've seen an agenda with that, right? Like there's been an agenda with that, and a rationale supposedly, which is if we don't tax corporations, they'll invest more into our economy and they will drive our economy. They'll trickle down that profit to their workers with higher wages and more secure jobs, right? We've all heard that. I'm sure we've all heard that. But in fact, and many of you in this room probably already know this because you're experiencing this on a daily basis in the work you do, that's not true. That's not what has happened. And just to bring the point home, here's another chart for you. The two lines are falling tax rates. The red bar is business investment in machinery and equipment. So what actually happens is as the tax rates fall, so does the investment. The investment falls as well. And so instead what they're doing with their lower tax rates is they're taking that into profit and doing things like share buybacks, ways to concentrate their wealth and power within their corporate landscape, right? And then use that as a competitive advantage. For them, it's not necessarily about what they can do to benefit the economy, it's what they can do to benefit their own competition within their corporate landscape. They're not evil. Yeah. This is them operating by the structure that we've created as a society for them. We created these conditions, and they're operating as such in these conditions. And this is what's happening. The other thing that's happening is that their profits are going up. So this is 1988 to 2020. The purple line is the profit rate, the average rate of profit, and the yellow line is the effective tax rate. So this isn't like the tax rate on the books. This is once they do all their deductions and various tax planning, right? And there's lots of complicated tax planning going down. What is the actual rate that they pay? And we see it's quite a remarkable chart to see because their profit is just starting to skyrocket as the tax rate goes down. And that's not turning into economic gain for the rest of us. That much is clear, right? We've seen stagnating wages. We've seen more precarity within the workplace, less security, less benefits attached to jobs, less training, less professional growth that's supported by the employer, right? I don't have this chart, but a friend of mine who's an economist has a great chart looking at the fact that right now we're in a situation where employers are investing the smallest amount they've ever invested in professional development of their employees. And we're letting them do it, right? We're letting them do it. So it isn't just about the corporations, it's also about the individuals, because corporate wealth is individual wealth eventually. There are people who run these corporations, right? So there's wealthy folks that are around, and what we're seeing is that the inequality, the income inequality between those who are very wealthy and the rest of us, frankly, it's not just the very poor, it is the rest of us, is growing. This is a chart, this is US, Canada, and Australia. Canada, if you're curious, is the dark line in the middle, and this is the income share, take the whole income pie that the top 1% has. So you can see, 1913 is where we start, 1919 if you're Canada, or 1920, 25, and where we end up is 2009. And we went down because there was some good policy around income redistribution, some good policy around trying to create equitable societies. And then you get this sort of anti-tax agenda, sort of, get government out of the way agenda happening around 1985. And we see the share of the income pie that the 1% has goes up. Now, obviously, I have an ideology. You can clearly see what my ideology is, okay? And so, there could be other reasons for this. I beg you to have that discussion with me, to see what those other reasons could be. Because I think it's pretty apparent with this information that some part of this, some significant part of this has to do with an anti-tax agenda, a pro-corporate agenda, a small government agenda that looks to take away the power that we have democratically to choose the society we want and instead put it into the hands of others. That's my belief. So I'm going to own that right up off the bat and not pretend that I'm coming to you as an objective source, because I'm not. All right, so what changes? Something does start to shift in this, right? Because we're not necessarily deeply entrenched in that anti-tax agenda anymore, else we wouldn't be sitting in this room right now. So what starts to shift? Well, about 2015, first, around 2010 or so, people start to recognize that income and wealth inequality is actually really hurting our communities, right? We start to see study after study coming out of organizations like the United Way, even BMO and the banks start going, this is a problem. Like, we have a problem here. We can't have this kind of income inequality. It's going to hurt us economically. It's going to hurt us socially. And then starts to come the discoveries, Panama Papers, Pandora Papers, Paradise Papers. And we start to recognize that there's a whole lot of corporations and wealthy individuals out there that are actually dodging the taxes completely with tax havens and other tax scheming. And that infuriates the public. It absolutely infuriates the public because, people are feeling like life is becoming less affordable. They don't want to pay more taxes, right? And then they're going, well, these guys aren't even paying their taxes in the first place. And with that comes studies by large media organizations like the Toronto Star that did a massive study on the high cost of low corporate tax rates, where they actually looked at the amount that corporations should be taxed and the amount of tax they actually paid, and it was a massive gap. I'll talk about the study that we just released about 3 weeks ago. That was the update to this, and it came with some astounding results. And so those sorts of studies started going. So more information started to come out about how low taxation was for those who actually held a significant portion of the wealth. One of the most famous ones was actually done in the U.S. It was a forensic accounting of tax filings by two brilliant economists. And what they found was that the wealthiest were paying a lower income tax rate than the average American, right? Which is absurd, absolutely absurd. And from there, that's what really kicked off, campaigns that we saw by Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren calling on a wealth tax. So now we have the politicians starting to get involved, and we have these high-profile campaigns that are talking about taxing the rich with proposals like a wealth tax, like higher income taxes for those top tax brackets. There's all sorts of proposals out there. There's, and more of them coming out every day. But that's really what kicks it off is we get some discovery around the tax havens. We get more discovery around the low tax rates of both corporations and wealthy individuals. And then politicians start to make proposals, right? And they start to gain public ground. And of course, this happens in Canada too. Christopher Phelan, commits to taxing tech giants. Hasn't done it yet, but did commit to it, and continues to talk about it from time to time. They've done other stuff, which we'll talk about in a second. And of course, Jagmeet Singh picks up the idea of a wealth tax in the last two elections, and does so with some increasing popularity. It becomes one of his most popular proposals, is the idea of a wealth tax. So that's where we've come to. I have to see if I can shift my slide here. Hold on a second. There we go. So, what's possible with a fair tax plan? Well, we did a sort of study of the tax system right prior to the 2021 election, and we came up with a platform. Basically found a whole host of credits, loopholes, tax rates, odd deductions that really just benefited wealthy corporations and individuals, and said, what would happen if we just took this away, right? We'd have $90 billion more. That's what would happen if we took this away. So that's $90 billion to invest in universal farm care, our health care system, our long-term care system, affordable education, affordable housing, better infrastructure to deal with climate adaptation, better infrastructure for rural communities, all this better infrastructure for various indigenous communities that are still living without clean water. Like all of that, that's money that we can use for the types of things that we're talking about in society all the time right now, right? We could use it to pay down the debt, right? The idea is that, it's those tax dollars actually fortify our democratic choice of what we want to pool our resources to pay for. So without them, then we don't have the choice of paying for these things. With them, we do. Then we can have the conversation of what are we going to use these tax dollars for? What's really important for us right now? Maybe we use the tax dollars to reduce the tax burden on middle and low income. Maybe we actually take down those tax rates. Without access to the tax dollars, though, we can't have that conversation. So that's one of the reasons why we need to tax appropriately. And it does redistribute wealth. If you take money from those who are very wealthy and put it into a university education program that allows more people access to a university education so they can get a better job, that is wealth distribution. That actually is wealth redistribution. Okay? So let's go back to our tables for a second. And let's switch the question around. We talked about what was the last memorable thing we heard about taxes. In considering all this, and considering the idea of a fair tax system, how could it actually make a difference in your community? And really try to make it concrete. If you were to imagine the everyday lives of your family members, of your workers, of the people that you live and breathe the same air with on the streets of your community, how would a fair taxation plan make life better? Just take another 4 minutes to discuss that at your table. There was one proposal, and that was made actually by the Roosevelt Institute in the U.S. That actually talked about a wealth tax that was specifically used to create baby bonds of $20,000 to $50,000 that were given to the children of all low-income individuals. And the idea is that we're going to give them $20,000 to $50,000, depending on, there was a number of things to depend on, so that they can actually start off life with some level of wealth to put a down payment on a home, to go seek a university education or some other sort of training, basically to have the kind of resources that a lot of other people have in life who have advantage and privilege. And it was their charts show that just that straight redistribution of wealth in that way would reduce the wealth inequality in the states to virtually nil within a couple of generations. So you can, it's a good rabbit hole to go down. As I say, it's an interesting one to think about how that could work. Right?
So just to kind of go on the education stream, one of the things that we spoke about was, yes, in terms of students being able to go to university, statistics show that it increases income, but I thought maybe we should go before that and all the students that are being streamlined out of university. So elementary school, so, at York and in other places, now since the post-George Foreman, people are, let's get scholarships for Black and Indigenous students, and then they turn around and they look and they say, well, where are they? And then when you look, it's like you've already streamed them out of university, so they're not taking the university courses, so they're not going, which means that they're not going to have access to this greater income and more wealth, right? So going back to, infusing that education system with good education where everybody is promoted to go forward and to succeed, right, is a great source, because then that going and getting that university education does access you to that income increase and stuff like that. So kind of went down a little bit of a rabbit hole, and that's where we sort of landed. But
that idea of streaming, that starts happening now in
yeah,
elementary school, right?
It really does. There's
It
lots
really
of
does.
studies on that, and
Yeah.
it's a little bit disturbing because even like York is very diversified, and you'll see a lot of black students, but they're not actually from Canada. They're international students from other places. So it's not that there's a lack of black students, there's just a lack of black Canadian students, for example, or low-income students. You know, they're shunted out. So
Yeah, so you could use taxes to better apply support programs and the right kind of education in an elementary and then secondary and then post-secondary level that ensures that all students have a chance of success.
Yeah.
Right?
And not streaming people out.
Yeah,
right?
and not streaming people out.
Because there's studies in Scarborough. I know one of our professors did a study that talks about, you know, the EQAO scores. These are our general education scores. So at grade 3, they're already planning. Those who are scoring least, money is being funneled to the prison system because that's where that group of students are going. So there's studies and evidence that is showing that if you're scoring less on these general studies in grade 3, don't worry. You're secure, your future is secure because the prison system they've increased income to the prison system to accommodate those students that will be feeding into that empire.
And there goes the biases that sit within all of those big data algorithms. That's like a whole other workshop. It's a good workshop too. Very good workshop, very scary workshop, but a very good one. Next thing.
Talking about fair taxes being a strategy tool to enable other tools to have better wealth distribution. I mean, right now we've got our wealth distribution, as he's shown, that's very tilted towards the high end, and that means the markets are tilted towards the high end, and that means people, even at the average coming in, are no longer accessible in those markets. Being established is one thing, but all the people who are trying to get established, very difficult to take that first step. And better wealth distribution achieved through fairer taxes could help allow the average to be, average shouldn't be a dirty word. Average should be a good word, right? Like, because we're all average. We don't want to be above average. We want to make the average higher.
Yeah. That's a great recognition of how wealth bestows privilege, right? And what happens with wealth generation after generation after generation, it doesn't get spread, it gets concentrated and continues to bestow privilege on those who, frankly, were lucky enough to be born into a family that had wealth, right?
The amount of luck that people are born every day in Canada is astronomical.
Yeah. It's a luck of whether or not you were born into a place in our society where you're privileged versus where you're not, right? For no good reason necessarily at all, right? Next step.
Yeah, ours came down to basically healthcare. Education certainly being tossed in there. Like, say, we don't have the resources. We've got small communities everywhere in BC, especially here. I'm not sure everywhere else, but we've got hospital rooms, emergency rooms closing down, and stuff like this. Everybody has to access healthcare, and that's the defining thing, right? So, trying to attract people who do signing bonuses and stuff like this to come from other countries or what have you. And now we've got students that are actually taking blood and stuff like that too,
right?
Which isn't a bad thing. So let's get them all into the system, but what does that look like?
Yeah, it's a healthcare system that's seen a lot of cracks in it, from being able to staff properly, to those staff being properly supported, to us having the proper facilities available, and the beds available. I mean, it's every way you look at that healthcare system right now, it's in need. And frankly, as a person getting older, that's kind of terrifying to me personally. And lives with a mother who's 80 now. I'm worried. That's got a real personal connection for me and may have others in the room. And that's the idea of this exercise, is to create a bit of a personal connection with this idea of taxes. Because again, for the most part, we kind of consider taxes that yucky thing we got to deal with, right? Once a year, and then every time we go for our groceries or our gas. So let's change the kind of perception and conversation we're having around taxes to what we need them for, what's useful for them. And if we can think as Canadians, as voters, as workers, as activists and advocates, which you all are, in taxes in that way, I think that we reclaim this space around taxes so that it actually returns to being something that we collectively gather together in order to spend the way we choose democratically and collectively as a society, instead of being this sort of, sacrificial lamb that those who benefit from low taxation regularly sacrifice in front of us, which is kind of what it is right now. So we're about 45 minutes in. I do have a little bit more to go in this section, but I'm actually just wondering how people are feeling about going for another about 10 minutes, then breaking, or whether or not people want to break now. You're good? You're good? Everyone good? All right. Good check-in just to make sure. Okay, so we're Canadians right now on taxation. In the second section, we're going to dig a little bit deeper into Canadians' perceptions around taxation. This was a poll done in 2021, right before the municipal, or not right before the municipal election, the federal election. You can see where my mind is. Hey, it's E-Day in Vancouver right now. Is that throughout BC, by the way, or is that just?
Yeah.
It's throughout BC. Yeah.
What is that?
Election day.
Election day today. Yeah. Yeah. So you can see where my mind is. So right before the last federal election, there was a large public poll done by advocates on Canadians' perceptions of wealth disparity, affordability, and taxation. And one of the results that came out is that Canadians, in fact, a large majority of them, 81% of them, think now is the time to tackle wealth and income inequality through proper taxation of those with wealth and wealthy corporations. So Canadians are directly attaching the idea of inequality with taxation. That is not a far leap for them to make. And they think that now is when we have to deal with this. So Canadians are ready. They're ready for change. They're ready for something different, right? And frankly, when I talk to Canadians about it, they're kind of pissed off, right? They're incensed with the idea that we're finding life less affordable. We're finding it harder to make our ends, to pay the rent and pay the bills and buy the groceries and get our kids to their activities if we can afford activities in the first place, right? Like they're finding that, and then continuing to hear about corporations walking away with tons of profit, with Elon Musk deciding that it's time to go to space, all that sort of stuff incenses Canadians, I think, at least in the conversation that I've had, and I think that's what we're seeing in this poll result. Yes.
How have those numbers actually changed, or have the question actually been asked before each federal election?
Yeah, they actually have shifted.
Brought up, or is this constant that this is just done, and Canadians just haven't brought that forward and made that, like say, unfortunately, like with Jane and stuff like that.
Yeah.
After that, nothing else was, right?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I can't. There hasn't been any. There's a trend on these questions, some of these questions in this poll, but only going back about 3 years. So, and it shows a shift over those 3 years where people become, about 5 to 7 points more positive towards taxation measures, particularly aimed at wealthy individuals and corporations. Sorry, go ahead.
I just have a question about, if Canada does something, how then does that affect the rest of the world? Or how, what I'm saying, can we on our own fix this? I don't feel like we can.
Mm-hmm,
and I get, making changes here is positive, but how will that affect us globally?
Yeah. Let's parking lot that one and talk about that in the second section. Because what we'll do is actually talk about specific tax measures. And that point is a really valid point. And some tax measures we can do on our own, and some we need international cooperation for. And so I think, being able to discern between the two and understand what you can and can't do is an important part of the conversation. But to go back to, I have done work on taxes and people being willing to pay taxes leading back into the early 2000s. And I saw, from a municipal level, people being willing to pay their taxes when they knew that it was going to go to better services. And then being less and less willing over time. So it sort of started to trend down as people became more reactionary towards taxes, and that was in direct correlation with anxiety around affordability. It's not that people were like, damn those taxes. They were like, I can't afford life anymore. So they felt a bit stuck. And then when we had the exposure around low taxation rates for corporations and wealthy individuals and tax havens and all that, I think that's the moment where we saw the shift, where people were suddenly like, wait a second, this needs to change. So let's talk. So we're going to just run through a few minutes of the myths and facts of taxes, okay? Because we've all heard a lot of things. I hear them all the time. I put forward a tax proposal and people are like, but. So one of the first myths that comes up is the wealthy worked hard for their money. They should get to keep it, right? What, you don't want anybody to get wealthy? Come on. Well, the truth of this is for the most part, most of them inherited it. Right? That's actually, when you look statistically, most of the wealthy had some wealth to start off with. We talked about that when we went around the tables, right? They had wealth, they had privilege, they had access, they had opportunity. And that's afforded to some people, and that's not afforded to others. And there's, as I said, we could do a whole workshop just on that. And you guys probably have, actually. Probably done workshops on privilege. And even the self-made get rich off of other people's backs. I mean, you're workers, you know that, right? Elon Musk does not make the next new gadget that he has in his car. Somebody else, some other person invents and creates that, and he ends up gaining the wealth off of that. That's not a bad thing he's doing. It's just we need to acknowledge and recognize that this is not just of his own making, right? And not pretend that it is. And the rich benefit from an equitable society. There was a study done about 10 years ago called The Spirit Level that basically showed that societies where there is massive income and wealth gap are societies in which everyone does worse, whether you're wealthy or poor. Now, of course, the poor do much worse than the wealthy, but the wealthy also do worse. Their life expectancy goes down. The unpredictability and stability of their lives goes up. So they don't benefit from an unequal society. They benefit from a more equitable society. They have better life outcomes, better well-being outcomes. So that's the first myth. The second myth, wealthy corporations will leave Canada. They'll just depart. They'll disappear, right? Some of them will leave. Okay? Let's recognize that some of them will leave. But let's also recognize that right now, in some ways, they're taking more than they're giving from us. Right? They're sort of extrapolating profit and wealth from us and holding it for themselves. And so, the question is well, what's the real benefit here? And the truth is, going back to the first point, is, they exist in Canada because Canada has a stable economy. It has a good pool of workers. It has things like healthcare, so an employer doesn't have to pay for healthcare, which they do in other jurisdictions. And there's a lot of benefits to being an employer in Canada. That if our tax system reduces us to a point where we can't have that kind of stability, that kind of education that allows for that good pool of workers, that we don't have a healthcare system that actually is universal. Then it becomes a less great place to be as an employer, right? So if it goes down some points, we're going to lose them anyways. Another myth. I love these myths. Higher taxes will hurt the economy and reduce economic activity. I mean, we know that this is not the case. We've seen this, we've seen in study after study over the last there's a great study done by the London School of Economics. That just sounds impressive. It is impressive. London School of Economics is like one of the big names out there. They did a longitudinal study over all the OECD countries at OECD.
OECD, Organization for Economic
Thank you.
Cooperation.
This is my acronym definer here. You'll be here all day. And showed that the low tax rates that we have had over the last 20 years, I think they actually did over 30 years, across 18 countries, did nothing to grow the economy. or the GDP, and in fact just made inequality worse, which actually harmed the economy. And so higher taxes aren't going to hurt us, especially if that tax revenue is used for public investment in the economy, right? That's what we can do with it. We can actually decide that we want our tax dollars to be economic drivers, but in ways that we want the economy to grow, right? With the kind of jobs that we want people to be able to have, with the kind of inclusivity in the economy that we think is important for society. They'll always find avoid paying. Yes, there is that problem. People avoid paying taxes, but that's because of the rules we set. That's because of the enforcement that our government decides to place on tax avoidance. And we can change that. Again, these are choices. This is not inevitable. It's not death, taxes, and the avoidance of taxes, right? We can change how people avoid paying their taxes by changing the rules around loopholes, around tax havens, around corporate transparency. All of that is possible for the Government of Canada to do on its own as well as internationally. And there's some movement on that we'll talk about in the second section. The government doesn't need more money, it just wastes it, right? Yeah, we should always scrutinize government spending. Absolutely, right? That's our money. We should always scrutinize government spending and ensure it's spending it the way we want it to be spent. And when they aren't, we should come down hard, like a hammer, on them for not spending it the way that we think it should be spent, right? But frankly, do we have a better chance of government spending the money the way we want, or corporations and wealthy individuals? Like, who do we have more control over? Well, clearly we have more control over government because we are in a democracy. Whether you think it's a really well-run, great democracy or not, that could be up for debate in a whole other workshop. But we are in a democracy, and we do get to choose who represents us. And if we don't like what they're doing with our money, we get to choose someone else, right? And in that way, we have way more control over it. So if they're wasting our money, that's kind of on us for not being engaged enough and not being out there enough to make sure that we are using up our power to ensure the money is spent the way we want it to be spent. Favorites. So we have the wealth tax. Everyone knows about that. It's a small tax on wealth above a certain level, like 10 million, 20 million, depending on whose proposal. Closing tax loopholes. These are loopholes and deductions that allow for certain types of income and holdings to be taxed at a lesser rate, typically. That's what most of them do. Increasing corporate taxes. Right now our corporate tax rate is the lowest it's been in 40 years. At the federal level, it's 15%. That's down from, I think, in the high 30s at one point in the 1980s, so a significant drop. Increasing income tax rates, high income tax rates, just the high income tax bracket, so like the top, basically $200,000 and more is where it would be increased. Again, it used to be at 43%, it's now down to 33%. So just to give you a scale of how taxes have reduced over time for those in the upper echelons. Cracking down on tax dodging so that the money doesn't go overseas to tax havens and then not be taxed at all. And then last, taxes to support climate action. I'm not just talking about the carbon tax here. Okay, there's a lot of other ways we could be using our tax system to support climate action beyond taxing carbon, although all of the air has been sucked out of that conversation around carbon taxing. Sorry, go say that.
I said green initiatives.
Yeah, green initiatives. You could actually use the tax system to do tax credits for certain types of green energy, green infrastructure, carbon neutral activities in business and economy. So there's lots of things we could do there with the tax system if we moved beyond just talking carbon taxes. So you're allowed to vote for 3, okay? So take a look at it for a second, and then we're going to sort of look at how Canadians feel about some of these same measures. Look at it for a second, choose your 3, and raise your hand when I call out the measure. So, everyone ready?
So we got to pick 3, right?
You got to pick 3. You got to pick 3 that you like, and you're going to raise your hand for those 3. Okay, so wealth tax. Who likes wealth tax? Oh my gosh. 2, 3, 4. Mark's unsure. Up or down?
I like more. I don't know.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 21. All right. Who likes closing tax loopholes? Ooh, lots there. That's 5, 9, 11. Oh, wow, okay, that's like 25. All right. Oh, I know. See, I'm stopping you from doing the all of the above, but you see, it's interesting when you look at what Canadians think. I increase the income taxes on the high income bracket. Oh, sorry, increase corporate taxes. People are like, I want to vote for that one. Whoa, that's like basically the whole room. That's like, okay, yeah, that's like the, okay. It's a straw poll, so I'm not doing exact numbers here because that would take too long to count. Increase income taxes on the high income bracket. All right, few less. That's interesting, right? That's like maybe 10 tops. I should have switched the order of these. Cracking down on tax dodging. Yeah, you got like, okay.
That's more than all of them probably combined.
Yeah, I think other people would vote for that too. Taxes to support climate action. All right, yeah. Yeah, I think you guys all used yours up.
I only chose 3.
All right. Yeah, I mean, because the top 3 are the ones that people chose the most, and in fact, that's actually fairly synonymous with how Canadians feel, and we'll go through that in a second. So, how do Canadians feel about taxation, and about where we sit right now in our economy? I showed you a poll result earlier from 2021. We're going to keep looking at that same poll now because it had a lot of other interesting findings. I'm not going to go through the whole thing because that's like 60 slides, but I've pulled out a few. So 7 in 10 Canadians believe that large corporations and the wealthy pay less than their fair share, while the majority believe that lower and middle income families pay much more. That's not too surprising, right? This stays with everything else we believe. Where it starts to become interesting is how people feel about the tax system. Do they think it's fair or unfair? Well, a lot of people feel like it's unfair, and they feel like if it became more fair, meaning more taxation in certain places, they wouldn't be the ones that'd be taxed more. They're pretty convinced that if we made our tax system more fair, it wouldn't be them that would be taxed. Now, some might say, well, those people who are considering it to be unfair are thinking a fair tax system means lower taxes, right? Because that might be the way that someone would rationalize what a fair tax system means. Well, the poll went and asked those people who said the tax system, that's the red here, the tax system is unfair, asked them, well, what's unfair about it? And what we found was, again, consistent. People think the tax system is unfair because wealthy Canadians pay less than their fair share, lower middle income families pay more than their fair share, there's an inequality gap, a tax proportion disparity, there's too many exemptions, right? The idea that taxes in general are too high, which would have been, that anti-tax agenda that we kind of lived with for the last 30 years, that taxes just in general are too high, that's what makes it unfair. That's fallen to just 9% of those thinking the tax system is unfair, thinking that's the reason why the tax system is unfair. So this is, again, how the conversation is changing, right? Around what the tax system is for, what is making it unfair in this moment. It's really how the tax system is proportioned across the tax base. That's what's unfair about it. And that's a big shift, I think. So, especially with the pandemic, what we saw, someone asked earlier what the tracking was between how people felt about taxes and support of taxation. And what I can tell you from doing some polling prior to the pandemic and in this poll, I actually helped design this poll, which is why I know it so well. 2021 was that the pandemic, like it did for so many things, really clarified this issue. And everyone's interest and support of tax measures went up post-pandemic, particularly because they saw it as a way to help pay for the cost of the pandemic on society and also to help build a recovery for Canada. And so that was asked very specifically of Canadians, what kinds of measures would they support as a way to pay for pandemic recovery. And I'll just go, you can't read because it's so small, I know. I'm sorry about that. There's no way I could make it bigger. I can't change the slide because it's done by Abacus. The first one is closing tax loopholes, and that's like 92% in support of that, right? That's pretty big. Like, it's very hard to get 9 in 10 Canadians to agree on anything. But on that's quite amazing. The next one is tax havens, 92%. Next one is a wealth tax, 89%, right? We move on. Next one is increasing the top income tax bracket rate to 37%, 89%. An excessive corporate profit tax paid by businesses whose profits were extraordinarily high during the pandemic. So these were people that made off like bandits while our debt was going up, while people were out of work, while people couldn't pay their rent, while we were giving out subsidies so that people could get by, right? And these folks were making huge profits, some of them unprecedented levels of profit. And so a tax on that. An inheritance tax on high wealth estates worth more than 10 million, 80% support on that. Increasing the corporate tax rates to what they were in 2000, 88% on that. So what's interesting to me about this is Canadians are a little bit like you just were in the room. They don't want to just choose 3. And the truth is we don't actually have to just choose 3. We can ask for all these things, demand all these things, and Canadians, frankly, are telling us that we should. They're telling us that they want this as well. So with that in mind, we're getting back to an exercise. This one is going to be a tad, is going to potentially be a tad more involved for each of you, because I'm going to ask you to become communicators, advocates on a tax measure. Choose one of these tax issues, any one you wish. Choose a partner. And you're going to have a conversation about that tax measure where you try to convince that person that this is a good idea. Now, here's how it works. You're going to identify 3 things about this issue. What's at stake? Why does it matter? And what you're going to do about it. And let me just talk a little bit about each of this. What's at stake is like the fact of the matter, right? So what's at stake? We have the lowest corporate taxation in Canada in 40 years. Why does it matter? Well, those tax dollars aren't going to our healthcare system, right? That's one reason why it matters. What should be done about it? We should raise that tax rate up by 5 points, right? If I put this, you could do this to anything in life, right? Like, what's at stake for me? This isn't true, by the way, but I did think about this as an example. What's at stake for me? I only slept 4 hours last night. I actually slept 7, so don't worry. I'm awake. Why does that matter? Well, I have to give this presentation to all these people, and I really want to be on my game. What am I going to do about it? I'm going to drink a fucking gallon of coffee. That's what I'm going to do about it. So you can apply it to anything, right? You can use this in your daily conversation. We're going to use it right now to pick a partner, have a little bit of a chat back and forth with your partner about the tax issue that you want to talk about, what those 3 things are, and then pitch them. Figure out a good 45-second minute pitch and then switch roles. So I'll let you know when you should switch roles. We're going to spend about 3-4 minutes in each role to give you some good time to chat it back and forth. And then we'll switch the role, and the partner will then be the person trying to tell you about a tax issue. All right? That facts don't win you the day. And in fact, it's talking about what matters to us as people that wins the day. You can use the facts to set the stage, but ultimately we need to talk about why this matters to us. What makes this thing that's at stake really make a difference in our lives? And that's actually what compels people to support something, to think about something differently, to potentially act. And as advocates and activists, you know this well, that's what you're trying to get people to do. You're trying to get people to take action, right? You need members that take action in order to do the work that you want to do. You take action on behalf of them, but they need to take action too, in most circumstances. If I'm wrong, please tell me that I'm wrong, because it's okay. I'm not a union leader, so I'm making some assumptions, but I've done a lot of work with unions, and I know how hard all of you work to engage members and to work on their behalf. That's amazing work. So let's talk a little bit about what we have won so far in Canada on taxation, because we have had some wins. They've been, small and incremental, but they've been there. And just, 5 to 7 years, we've seen some shifts. I'm not going to go into super big detail on this, but, since the Trudeau government came in and the pressure ramped up in 2015, actually during the 2015 election, because of the Pandora Papers, or at that time it was the Panama Papers, coming out, that's when the conversation ramped up, and they came in with election commitments to certain taxation measures, and they actually did institute some of them, including a slight increase on that top income tax bracket that they then actually gave a decrease on the second lowest income tax bracket, and then bumped up, I think, the base deduction as well. So they did a clear swap. We talked about that before. They did close a couple of loopholes a little bit. They just closed a loophole in the last budget on flow-through shares in oil and gas companies, which was really just a way to benefit the executives in the oil and gas companies, had no benefit to anyone else. And they've closed loopholes around stock options a little bit, not fully, partially closed them. They have, in fact, done an excess profits tax on banks and insurance. The question is why they didn't do it on the rest of the wealthy corporations, but they have done it on banks and insurance. We have a luxury goods tax. To be honest with you, I'm not the biggest fan of that tax. I'm like, it's okay. But it is a measure that they're trying to do in order to ostensibly tax wealth. That's what they're trying to do there. I think there's better measures, but they have done that. A minimum real tax rate. So this is an interesting one. The top 1% of tax earners, what they've done in order to try to deal with them avoiding paying taxes, is said you have to pay a minimum tax rate on your income, right? Not just what you file, but on your income. We're going to set that minimum at 15%, so it's pretty low, frankly. And it's kind of sad that a lot of them are able to drop below 15%, but now there's a floor. They cannot pay less than 15% on their full income. And then there's commitments to things like a digital service tax, stronger anti-avoidance rules around tax. That's actually really important, and that's in the midst of being debated right now. We're involved in that conversation at the federal level so that Canada has better rules around tax avoidance. Canada is one of the only jurisdictions that has not successfully prosecuted any of the Panama, Pandora, and Paradise Paper offenders, to call them. Yeah, I think they're offensive. They're one of the only jurisdictions that has not prosecuted a single one of them or gotten any of that money back. And it's because our rules are so incredibly weak. So we need to change that, and they're starting to. Every federal party leader in the last election, including the Conservative Party leader, talked about fair taxation. They understand that exactly what the polls say, that people know the system's unfair, and they know why. And so everyone is talking about this now, and we're even seeing provincial action. BC and Quebec particularly, BC's actually done a whole host of tax measures, from increasing the corporate tax rate to tax on vacant properties, vacant homes, to luxury real estate taxes, so on and so forth. And those of you from BC are probably greatly familiar with that. So we're going to go through 4 tax measures and just talk a little bit about why. Dig into the ones that are most popular. Yeah?
Sorry, one quick thing so I can hear myself through the microphone. How much of these measures are coming from the Prime Minister's office, and how many of them are really a result of the Liberal NDP pact?
Right.
And the pressure that the NDP has put on Trudeau.
Yeah.
Because he doesn't have a majority, of course, in the House of Commons. So how much of these are from each of those areas of the House of Commons?
Right, yeah. It's interesting. I mean, so, the Liberal government as it stands now, the Trudeau, let's call it the Justin Trudeau Liberal government, because that's the version of federal Liberal government that we're dealing with right now, is, started off in the beginning in 2015 quite a bit left of the previous reigning Liberal government back in Chrétien and Martin days, which actually reduced tax rates. So they actually were part of the problem. They reduced tax rates, they created tax loopholes. When Justin Trudeau came in, and that ilk of leaders came in, they actually started campaigning left, and I think that was them triangulating where people were and where they could get the greatest vote share. And so they've always campaigned left of where the Liberals were before. And this is natural in political parties. You see this see it with every political party. Political parties, tend to move throughout. Oh, thanks.
Yeah.
You don't know about another angle.
No.
Political parties tend to move based off of where public debate is, right? They shift somewhat through the windows of their ideology. And I think we're seeing the federal Liberals definitely shifted at the start. So they came in because of public pressure with some tax measures like that increase in the top income tax bracket, that was 2015. And then other measures like the excess profit tax, closing the tax loopholes, the beneficial ownership registry, which we didn't really talk about, but this is basically creating transparency so we know who the real owners of companies are and corporations, because oftentimes that's hidden in shell companies and you don't know who those owners are, and those shell companies are used for all sorts of dubious purposes, money laundering, tax evasion, so on and so forth. Canada has some of the worst rules in the world on this sort of stuff, and so that's really important. All of that has come in the last couple of years, largely due to pressure from the NDP and from the supply, what's it called, the supply and demand, supply and something agreement.
Supply and confidence, but I believe.
Supply and support. Is it supply and confidence? Supply and support.
Yeah.
We know what it is, right? It's that agreement. It's that agreement that's supposedly keeping our government stable till 2025. We'll see what happens. So a lot of that has come from that pressure. And that pressure is driven, the NDP was not talking, frankly, about taxation in 2010, right? Because they didn't feel like that was space for them to talk about. So that has come from the public. Ultimately, that has come from the public. I've been in progressive movements a long time, and taxes used to be a third rail. You did not talk about taxes. That was not territory that was in our arena at all, right? And that has really shifted. Okay? So wealth tax. Why a wealth tax? I'm probably pointing out the obvious, but I think it's important to understand some of the critical elements of a wealth tax. Wealth is different than income. People gather wealth, and they gather in more and more concentrated forms, and they sit with that wealth, and that wealth doesn't benefit us economically when they sit on it. There's nothing that benefits us to a bunch of people sitting on a bunch of wealth. And it sits there untaxed. And that's why we say a wealth tax as well as income tax, because we have to recognize that we need some of that wealth for our own economic prosperity as a country. Concentrated wealth like that really threatens democracy. Just take this in for a second. 26 people in our world hold as much wealth as half the population of the globe. 26 individuals hold as much wealth as what's our global population, like 6 billion now?
Almost 8.
8 billion? As 4 billion people. Like, that's insane. And with that wealth comes power, right? Who were some of the top forces arguing against a patent deferral on vaccines? It was a couple of those billionaires. Why do a couple of individuals get to influence UN policy? Because they're really, really rich, right? That's why. And so this is actually a threat to our democracy. This kind of wealth inequality is a threat to our democracy. And a wealth tax of 1% on 10 million, a wealth tax on 2% on 20 billion would raise 10 billion a year. And frankly, I remember hearing a guy who's a BlackRock investor who's actually a proponent of wealth tax say, like, come on, guys. Like, for me, that's like, I can't buy my second Ferrari. Like, so what, right? Come on, what's it really mean to someone with that much wealth to pay that tax? Not much at all in terms of the quality of their life. So that's a wealth tax. Closing the worst tax loopholes. So this is why tax loopholes are so bad. People know about the capital gains exclusion loophole. This is the idea that someone's pointing.
Yeah.
Yes.
That 1% and 2%, would that be on their total wealth per year?
That would be on their wealth above those cap limits. So that would be wealth above 10 million. So the 10 million, first 10 million doesn't get taxed.
Let's say someone has $1 billion.
Yeah.
Every year they pay 2% on that $1 billion.
They would.
So 10 years, they pay 20% of their billions gone in tax.
In tax, yep. But remember that if they have $20 billion, they are likely increasing their $20 billion by 5% a year.
Right.
So ultimately, their wealth, just by sitting on it and doing absolutely nothing, is increasing by a greater rate by far than they're being taxed.
Unlike our wealth that the bank takes more than we get.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Closing the worst tax loophole. So the capital gains exclusion loophole costs us $22 billion a year, and half of that cost is in corporate capital gains exclusion. So basically, this is the idea that if you have assets, like stock options, like properties, and you sell them and you get a gain, that's treated differently than income made from wages. You're taxed at half the rate. You pay half the rate for that type of income. Now, let's take principal residence out of this, because oftentimes people will just exclude, allow people to understand that for principal residences, people, that's about people's retirement. That's a whole different conversation. And just talk about other properties, or even just talk about properties that and assets that corporations hold, right? If you sell a bunch of shares and you get income from that, there is no good reason why that income should be taxed at half the rate. So those kinds of loopholes, and there's a bunch of them. There's an entertainment and business tax loophole that basically allows things like the skybox at the stadium that the corporations have for them to take their executives to that and their business partners to that and enjoy themselves and spend money on that and basically deduct that as a cost of doing business, right? I don't get to deduct my Maple Leaf tickets, right? Even if I bring a friend that I might do a business, I don't get to do that. So why do they get to do that? And the list of loopholes is, as I said, massive, and I've just chosen 3. Here's another one. There's a tax break on real estate income trusts. Basically, they're not taxed. These are financial bodies that organizations use to basically speculate on housing. And we work with a tenants group that basically is dealing with some of these big real estate income taxes and income tax trusts that are basically scraping the profit off the housing and not investing in the buildings. So their electricity is failing, their heating is failing, their rents are going up. And that's because the housing is being treated like an investment, and an investment that's great to invest in because the taxes are so low there. So it's driving the marketization of our housing, which is not something we need right now in Canada. Corporate taxes. Now, this is, so this chart is kind of interesting. Imagine that it's 2000, right? And we had the tax rates that we had in 2000. And then imagine that people actually paid those tax rates in 2000 now, right? And didn't avoid paying the taxes. Over the last 20 years, had we kept the tax rates we had in 2000, and we actually made people pay those tax rates, corporations pay those tax rates, we would be $1.1 trillion richer as a country. $1.1 trillion is what we've lost due to corporate tax avoidance and falling corporate tax rates. That's how much has gone down. So that's an extreme amount of money, right? That I pointed out earlier that the Toronto Star had done a study on what we call as the corporate tax gap, which is the amount that they're supposed to pay on the books and the amount they actually pay, right? And the difference between those. We just redid that study to find out what had happened over the last few years. And what we found out is that in 2021, that tax gap, so just draw your minds back to last year and what kind of year that was for all of us, right? Not a great one for a lot of us, a really, really, really horrible one for some of us. And that was the year that they doubled their tax gap. and walked away with $30 billion. And they were able to do that because their corporate profits went up by 60%. 60%. And the real tax rate they ended up paying dropped from about 19% to 15%. And so there was this massive gap that was created, and we saw the amount of corporate tax avoidance double to $30 billion. It's quite astounding to us. So there's ways that we can crack down on this sort of stuff, right? We can raise the corporate tax level. We can do better enforcement, but we can also do what Biden just did, which is really interesting, is he actually created a floor. Remember we were talking about the floor for the top income tax earners? Well, we could say to corporations, you're going to have a floor on your book profits, right? Book profits are what large corporations have to actually report to their stockholders, right, to their investors and their stockholders. They can't avoid that one. They actually have to tell people what they're making. They don't have to tell the government what they're making, but they have to tell their investors what they're making. So if you put a minimum tax on their book profits, then in a sense that starts to limit their level of tax avoidance. And Biden just did that. He just put a minimum tax on their book profits. It's like, you're not avoiding that. Sorry. We could do something like that as well and improve the situation. Cracking down on tax dodging, because that doesn't do it all. We haven't, as I said, prosecuted a single tax dodger effectively. Our lack of corporate transparency makes us a destination spot for money laundering. We had Russian oligarchs funneling their money through Canada last year. That became quite big news. And we need to do better. We need better transparency. We need better corporate transparency for a whole lot of reasons, including tax dodging and tax havens, right? And what's interesting about this is an area, a lot of these are areas where you can get sort of multi-partisan support in Canada. I could show you charts that show you that conservatives back these tax measures at levels that are probably a lot higher than you think. A majority of them back these tax measures. In fact, one of our champions right now on corporate transparency is a guy named Adam Chambers. Someone here was from the Barrie area. I was talking to someone here from the Barrie area. Adam Chambers is around that. No, he's in Midland. So he's not, he's just north of you. He's a young conservative MP who's a champion on this. He's putting forward a private member's bill on this sort of stuff. So this isn't just a left issue, right? Some of this is just an issue of fairness. Sorry, what else was I going to say? Oh, and double non-taxation agreements. Double non-taxation agreements, basically, has everyone heard of this before, double non-taxation agreements? Is that familiar? Okay, so here's the deal in sort of the cliff notes of it. We make an agreement with another jurisdiction saying, the corporation, this multinational corporation is operating in both of our jurisdictions. We're going to make an agreement that they only get taxed in one of our jurisdictions, right? So that they don't get double taxed, because no one wants to get double taxed. That's like the big no-no in tax policy, is don't double tax. And what ends up happening, though, in reality, is we make these double non-taxation agreements with tax havens. So basically, we open the door for corporations, Canadian corporations, to take their money and go file it in a tax haven in order to avoid paying taxes. And then through really complicated tax scheming, those same corporations figure out how to divvy up their profits to sometimes avoid taxes altogether through being able to claim tax deductions in both countries on the same money. And so we've just basically created a massive problem for ourselves. And it's completely legal because we've allowed it to be. So these are the sorts of things that we need to do. We need to increase transparency. We need to do a better job of having enforcement rules. And we need to end really, really inane agreements like the double non-taxation agreements. So those are just some of the measures I wanted to walk through, because I think those are the measures that we talk about a lot. And it's not that I expect you to remember all of this here. It's actually a demonstration of the kind of information that my organization is here to provide you with. We have fact sheets and explainers on each of these measures and more on our website that are fully available to you. If you decide that you're going to work on one of these issues We're here to help you get the details, get the arguments, get the statistics that you need to talk to people about them, or just even to understand it yourself. That's our purpose. We do the research, but then we also try to figure out a way to communicate this so that everyone understands it and can talk about it. You know, you don't need to be a tax expert to talk about taxes. You've just proved that to yourselves. You guys have been talking about taxes the last 2 hours. With each other, with me, you've been taking me on, it's been great, you know? Like, you don't need to be an expert in order to talk about that. You have, the resources are available for you. And one of your strengths is that you're opinionated, you're active, and you know how to organize people. That's an incredible strength, right? That's what unions do. That's what unions are. So we're gonna go on another break, because it's about that time. I can see some sleepiness in the room. And here's what I want you to consider on the break. Let's make it about a 5-minute break. If possible, 7 minutes for those who want to step outside. And here's what I want you to think about. I want you to think about what the strengths and opportunities of the CCU are in terms of taking action on taxes. So strengths are things that are inside the organization. What does the organization itself have to offer, to bring forward? And opportunities are where there's space on the landscape. You know, what's out there externally that offers you a situation by which you can take action. Okay, so just think about the strengths and opportunities as you go on your break, as you're chatting with each other, as you're grabbing coffee, and we'll come back and we'll share a little bit of that, and then we're going to get into some campaign planning. All right? Thanks, everyone. So campaign planning 101, I know for many of you, I'm probably just reviewing what you already know, and I'm more doing this so that we're all talking in the same terminology about objectives, strategies, and tactics. So objectives are realistic, measurable outcomes that you're trying to achieve. That's what an objective is. So I've given the example. I'm going to try to take a trip to Paris by the end of 2023. I can't do it in 2022 because there's only 3 months left, so that's not realistic. 2023 is more realistic. I have a very specific, a measurable outcome. I'm not actually going to France, just so you know. There's no way I could afford Paris. Strategies. This is the things that are necessary to reaching that objective, the things I need to do. Well, I need to save money. I need to find cheap airfare. And I need to book some vacation time. So those are my strategies. That's how I'm going to achieve this objective. And my tactics are the specific activities that I'm going to undertake in those strategies. Now, I'm going to put away 10% of my paycheck in a separate account. I'm going to get on all those fare watchers on those sites so that I can find the lowest possible fare. And then I'm going to start talking to my boss about what time I can take off and starting that negotiation so I can get the time off. So those end up being the tactics. Look, I have no hard and fast rules about this stuff, especially with strategy and tactics. Those things tend to blend and blur a lot. What's a strategy, what's a tactic? I put this up here just to sort of help organize and orient our thoughts a little bit around it as we go into this next exercise. If it's confusing, don't sweat it. Just write down what you think you should do, what you're interested in doing, right? Where you think you have some power and agency. So now forget that. All right, so here's what we're going to do. Each group, each table here, is going to spend couple of minutes, let's say 3 minutes or so, putting together 1 to 3 objectives, tax campaign objectives. And it's really up to you. Now this could be something as simple as we're going to get 5,000 people to sign that new mode petition. We're going to do it over the next 3 months. That could be an objective. It's measurable. It's realistic depending on what you think of your strengths and your opportunities, right? But set an objective that is realistic and measurable. It could be that in the next provincial election that we're in, we're going to make sure that all 3 parties are talking about taxation, right? That's also measurable and realistic and objective, or measurable and objective and realistic. So that's the kind of stuff you can find, and I want you to write 1 to 3 of them on sticky notes that are in front of you. And then one person from your group is going to come up and present those objectives and stick them on this pad. And then all of us are going to come up and put a check mark on our top 2 or 3. Vote for 2. Uh-oh, we have to vote again. Sorry, guys. You might just mutiny at this point. They're like, we're not voting. But why don't we do that now? So just take 3 or 4 minutes at your table, design 1 to 3 objectives, and then select someone to come up and present.
And that's on the current campaign.
On the current campaign, or on if someone's, if there's another objective there that people really want to do.
So it doesn't have to be the current campaign.
It doesn't have to be the current campaign. It's nice if it links into the current campaign. I'm sure we'll see some that do.
So our first one, we will obtain 3,000 signatures on the new mode campaign for fair taxation. Yeah.
Perfect. That's like self-explanatory.
Yeah.
Awesome.
It's kind of the one you already said, but it's good. The second one, we will educate our members on why fair taxation is important.
Great. All right.
And we will challenge our representatives to report back at the next EB on how many of their members signed onto the new mode campaign.
Great. So some accountability there too. Awesome. That's great. Who wants to go next? See, he made it look so easy. Come on up. I'm going to actually just spread these out a little bit, and the reason is that if you're presenting an objective that's similar, group them. Let's group them together because it's not, great minds think alike.
Yes. So, we are going to group one together. We're going to educate our members on the importance of fair taxation policies, but we're going to empower them to speak on the issues. Now, where did that one go?
I think it's the middle one. Yeah.
Okay. To share CCU's position on fair taxation with current government. And to elect politicians who commit to action on fair taxation policy.
Ooh, nice. All right. We're expanding our objectives list. All right. Who's next?
That's okay. Okay, so our first objective is to get our MLA or MPP to support a corporate tax increase. Sort of go on the record and say they support that. We stole that from.
Yeah, why don't you group it with the elect politicians because it's political action right down here. Yeah. It's not the same, but there's some alignment there in the objective.
We also have increased public support and awareness for tax fairness issues. We were trying to remember on your graph what it's at, but we were thinking, you do a survey, you take a number, and then you try to increase that number. And then lastly, and most importantly, we have overthrow capitalism.
Fantastic. Okay, who's next? Who's going to follow overthrowing capitalism?
That's a tough one to follow.
It's a tough act, eh?
It's a tough act.
Okay, who's next? How about this table over here? You haven't presented yet. Come on up.
We've only got one.
One is good enough.
Good one.
Yeah, I bet you it is. You only need one.
French campaign?
Should talk on the way over there, just scoot right back.
What fun at that.
So our objectives is 20% of affiliate members to be signed to the Fair Taxes campaign.
Excellent.
And it's totally new,
Yeah, I think it's right there.
almost totally new.
All right, come on up.
So we said to create a campaign to publicly shaming tax offenders.
Nice. That has not been up there yet.
Okay.
There we go. New territory.
We like being unique. Another one is to educate membership on fair taxation through monthly meetings, email blast, executive committee overseeing the education of our members on fair taxation. Also through Zoom or lunch and learn workshops, and also material development by CCU, so all get the same message.
That's right up there, that group there. Yeah, and that's more than an objective. That's like a whole campaign strategy.
Yeah.
They basically wrote a campaign on this.
Attaboy, Neil.
Way to go! Well done. All right, we got it. I love it. I don't even have to say anything. People are now just coming up.
Okay. So make sure I put this in the right order. Ours first was going to be to educate all of our members in the union and so forth on what fair taxes and fair prices mean to us and how important it is to them. So that was our key thing, so that would be that one. And then communicate the CCU campaign, because why reinvent the wheel when it's already started? So communicate it because, communicate it by emailing it out, putting it on our social media platforms, and pushing it out that way to the members and their families. Communication.
That's I think up in this increased support. This part right here. I think it's
Still in education?
Still in education.
Okay. And then the last one was take action. So lobbying government to take action to lower it. So whether it's doing protests outside of government or lobbying individually with your MLA at their place of office or whatever. So
That's great. Put it right here. This one? Yeah.
All
Right, we have 2 more tables, am I right? These 2 tables?
you guys are freaking
cowards.
So we just basically said, lots of things to get out there, but it was just ways how we were going to do it. So it was basically petitioning government, right? So do that through letter writing, emails, or in person. Had through social media, so getting Sean or Adrian, getting it onto the Facebook, Instagram, stuff like that. And awareness through union meetings, so hand out pamphlets at union meetings, bring in some presenters, put it onto the local website and onto the national website.
That's great. I think, just put it right in there, because it's got all,
They're all the
we've got
same.
all of them. We've got all of them. Okay, I have one more table. Am I right? One more? Or is everyone presented? Did I mess up my count here? Everyone's presented?
That's 2. I don't know. Oh, yeah, I guess,
Yeah, great, super. Okay, so I'm just gonna spread these out a little bit. And just sort of put them into some general areas. Awareness union meetings website, I'm gonna put that there. Social media, I'm gonna put here, so there's public education and support. We've got, I'm just gonna review what we've got here. So we've got a bunch here that are about educating members and the public. Some of these are about educating the public as an objective. And then actually what people have done, and this is, as I remember I said at the beginning, I said, don't fuss if you start to blend objectives and strategies and tactics. We've got some strategies in here as well. Like social media is a strategy. Executive committee meetings and how you use your executive committee in order to drive some of that. That's a strategy too, right? But that's okay, because objectives are no good without the strategies to make them happen, right? And so you've got generally some increasing education and increasing support and awareness. So we'll just kind of call this education and awareness section here. Then you've got in here sort of the lobbying aspect. So this is like political action. And it's everything from making sure that the government knows about your position on taxes, to getting down and getting a local MLA or a local MVP or a local MP to support a certain tax measure, like a corporate tax increase. And what I love about this measure here is this is something that the Confederation can do as a whole, but also this gets down to what affiliates can do individually in order to answer some of the tax debate that's happening in their local jurisdictions as well, right? So you can both be part of what the Confederation does as a whole, and then also what action you decide to take. We have very, very specific objectives to help make the current petition campaign, the new mode petition that's on the CCO website, a successful measure. right? By deciding that you're going to set an objective of how many people fill out that petition, right? And that's a great, really practical thing to have at this moment, because you already have the tool in place. So why not set an objective about how you're going to make sure that that measure is successful? And then we have some other ones that are like, you know, the big ones, overthrow capitalism, right? Tough objective, but you know, this is what people would call the stretch goal, or throwing the ball way down the field, right? It's important, you know, for us, I think, as activists and as, you know, people who are trying to make the world better, to think about the big things. Right? What are the big things we actually are trying to change in the world? You know, for me, the big thing is social justice. I want real justice, and I think about that. Try to think about that on a regular basis. As I get caught in the weeds of this and that, having the big objectives and the big goals in mind is really, really important. So hard to measure, but important to have up here, right? I'm trying to see what I missed. We have, this is also, so show the current, here we go. This one's a great one because it sort of says, publicly shaming tax offenders, right? And that's part of education, but it's also part of just making sure that we continue to demonstrate to the public that it's unfair. Some people are getting away with evading their taxes when they shouldn't, right? So that's a great objective. So what I'm going to have you do is, we're not going to actually vote on these, okay? Because they're too hard to vote on. I think I might have mutiny in the room. I'm just going to check us for time. What I'm going to actually have you do is just consider these objectives, and we're just going to have a final conversation at our tables about what each of you feels like you can walk out of the room today and do when it comes to fair taxation. What's one action, tactic, or strategy you want to try to do? Considering the whole conversation that we've had today from beginning to end. And it can be everything from like, you know what, I have this friend who's really anti-tax and I'm going to have a conversation with them, right? I'm going to go have a conversation with that person. It could be, you know what, I want to make a small truncated version of this presentation and give it to some of my members. It could be, you know, I'm going to take that petition that the CCU has, and it's going in our next newsletter. So it could be all of those things, but just have a little conversation in this last 10 minutes or so at your table, and then we'll just popcorn out some ideas, and that's how we'll end the session. Does that sound good? And so I'm going to beg your patience and give you some parting thoughts about what I tend to think of in campaigns like this. What I try to ask myself in terms of questions in campaigns like this. And I'm going to take the example of the CCU petition campaign, because that's what's in front of us right now, as a way of, you know, gathering my thoughts. So if I'm running a petition campaign, I'm running it, in my mind, I'm asking myself, my phone seems to be working again. This is big news, folks, because my phone crashed during this presentation. So the fact that it's beeping at me is a good thing. I know it's annoying. So anyway, one of my first thoughts would be a petition for what end? What am I trying to achieve with the petition? And there's a couple of things that get achieved with petition. One is you do get some messages into some politicians, which is great. So you put yourself on the map. Right? This kind of petition puts CCU on the map, on the issue in front of politicians. It's like, hey, we're here, we're paying attention to this issue, and we're starting to gather our forces around it, is what it's saying. It also helps you acquire individuals in your organization or in the public who are interested in your issue, because they're signing up and they're putting themselves on the map. They're like, hey, we're interested in this. Right? So now you're gathering your forces, and you have a way to contact them because your petition is gathering their information, and now you have a way to communicate with them about it. So that's one thing I would start to consider. And in driving that petition, going, okay, now I want this petition to be really, really successful, I have to think about, well, what's going to make someone take action on my petition? Because I'm asking them to go do something. And there's a ladder of engagement that people interact with. And the first, part of that is becoming aware of the issue, right? Just becoming aware of it. Oh, there's an issue. Taxation is a problem, and this organization's talking about it. So it's awareness. And then it moves from awareness to support. Oh, I support what they're saying. And support in and of itself is not enough, because lots of people passively support all sorts of things, right? So then you've got to take it to action. And so understanding how that ladder works, some of the things that I know in talking to folks is to get people to act usually involves some sort of interactive conversation. Whether it's with you or someone else, they're going to have a conversation with someone down the road in order to actually feel like they're going to act on something. Because we're social beings, right? We don't just take messages in and then go, oh, we're going to do this. We actually talk to each other about it, and that's what drives action. So in my planning, I might go something like, okay, I got to make my members aware. I'm going to put it in the newsletter. Then I really want my members to support. I'm going to make sure it comes up at one of the union meetings so we actually have a conversation about it. And in that conversation, I'm going to really encourage them to act, right? And make it available to them the way Sean made it available to all of you in the room by saying, go to the website right now and do this sort of thing. And I'd be looking for multiple tools by which to do that. Social media shareables, presentations, maybe little videos. If you've got websites that your members go to on a regular basis, maybe little videos. Workplace lunch and learns, if you have some capacity to do that, are all great ways. And some of those ways came up because that's, again, what you guys already do so well. So it's just about taking those same tactics and now putting them towards this objective. Another thing I would always consider in this is, okay, what am I going to do after that? Because you're in a process where you're engaging all these people. And that's one step. But you should start thinking now about what you're going to do once they're engaged. So what's the next thing you want to do so that you're starting to direct yourself towards that? So CCU puts a petition out there. It gets 3,000 to 4,000 people signed up to the petition. You don't want to leave those 3,000 to 4,000 people not hearing from you again about taxation or some other important issue that you have. So what's going to be your next step to keep them engaged and involved and move them up that ladder of engagement, right? Are you going to now ask them to go write a personal letter to their MP? Are you now going to ask them to, to apply their support to a particular vote, take action from a political, democratic point of view? What are you going to do next? And I'm just throwing ideas out there as a demonstration, not to tell you what to do at all. Do as you choose as your organization. And then the last thing I'd say is that campaigns always work better when people feel invested in the campaign, and people feel invested when there's a two-way conversation happening, right? So when they get an opportunity like we did in this room to talk to each other about it and tell each other our points of view, that's when people start to get invested. And when they get invested, it's when they take action, they continue taking action, and really, that's frankly where social action comes from. So that's my parting words. Look, it's 12:15 on the dot.
Well done.
Thank you so much. You're fabulous. Really appreciate it. We can have a thank you slide. There's my thank you slide. Thank you.
Thank you, Katrina. And we have a small token of our appreciation today, and you're going to join us for lunch, I hope.
Yes, absolutely.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for doing this, and I look forward in the future to having you back. So thank you again.
Well, thank you,
very
Kelly,
much.
and all of you for spending 3 hours with me talking about taxes.